Welcome everyone to today's presentation. We are going to be talking about the white paper that Heather French and Jim Vilker from the Audit Link and Settlement teams wrote regarding brute force bin attacks and what you need to know. It's a really awesome white paper. I look forward to helping them present today. In the meantime, I do want to let everybody know we have you placed on mute as you are entering today's presentation. So we'll be using the chat features today to ask questions, get interaction from you, and really just make this a presentation that is informative and fun, as well as educational for you. I'm Julie Gessner. I'll be facilitating today's presentation. My primary purpose here at CU Answers is to help credit unions just like you design strategic approaches for your operations and member service teams. This is accomplished by connecting you to the people inside of CU Answers like Heather and Jim that can help you design strategic approaches for excellence. Jim Vilker is with us today. He's the VP of Professional Services with Audit Link. Hopefully you all know Jim. He has been in the credit union compliance and regulatory audit spaces for over 30 years. So it's quite some time. He's got lots of knowledge to share with you and loves to share that with CU Answers. Over that time, he has served as a regulator, credit union executive, and currently as the leader of our Audit Link team here at CU Answers, which is a division of a cooperative QSO here in our building. Jim is a holder of professional accreditations of the NCCO and CAMS and has an awesome team that I hope you have the opportunity to meet soon. Heather French is the VP of Client Interactions here at CU Answers in her new role. We're pleased to have her here with us. Heather has been in the credit union industry for over 24 years, so combined experience today is outstanding. Heather is responsible for working with the credit union team members as their strategic partner, specifically in the settlement and conversions teams and now in client interactions. Heather has been with the CU Answers team for over 13 years, with the past 7 as leader in residence for ATM debit and credit card processes and projects. So I hope that you've all had the opportunity to meet and work with Heather and her team. They are quite amazing client interaction management side and everything they're doing with ATM debit and credit transactions and so much more. I can't wait for you to meet Heather if you haven't done that yet. So I'm going to start my video and start today's conversation about brute force bin attacks and what you need to know. Today, we are going to cover what happened during President's Day back in, oh gosh, so long ago, 2020, but really take you into what that means today. So not just what it meant then, but what it means today. Understanding what a brute force bin attack even is. What does that mean to you? What's the process of discovery? Why do you need to know about this? And how do you mitigate your risk moving forward? So some contact information that I'll present later on in the presentation as well. But right now, I want to bring up this awesome white paper that they wrote collaboratively. It'll take me just a few minutes while I switch screens. So here we go. So this is our Mitigating Brute Force Bin Attacks white paper written back in May in 2020. So Heather, why don't you take us through a little bit of why you did a similar conference in the past. We had this conversation before, but how is it different now? And what's prompted you to want to talk about this again?
Absolutely. So previously around the holidays, we tend to find that credit unions experience some fraud. Usually that's when it's most relevant to the credit unions, and one of the things that we find that we want to bring to your attention is what this is and what you should be doing, and then setting up some reminders associating with it to say, hey, it's a holiday time again, what is your plan? Here Jim and I are going to give you an idea of what occurred, and some ways to mitigate, but making sure that it's kind of in your face and that these are things that you're paying attention to. So what we experienced previously was what we call a brute force bin attack. And that is where you have a fraudster who gets a hold of your bin and can you take that bin into an auto dialer or some, strategic program that somebody writes behind the scenes and just kind of spins until it can identify and hit on a valid card number. When they get a hold of that card number, then they spin through and they validate your CVV codes, your expiration dates, until they get all the pieces of the puzzle that they need in order to be able to perform some fraud. So when they do gather all that information, where the credit union can see some of these things is by specifically logging into their vendor or switch and looking at things on their side. When you have somebody who's trying to present a card number that's invalid to your credit union, your vendor or switch is not going to pass that information over to your core. So I'm not going to see that information. So you guys need to make sure that you're logging in and you understand how to query into your own core or into your own vendor or switch to locate authorizations. Because a lot of times you'll see a whole bunch of attempts in that query, if you will, that's like card invalid, card invalid, card invalid, and then all of a sudden they'll get a hit on a card number. And then you might see invalid expiration date, invalid expiration date, invalid expiration date, and then you'll see then they'll get a hit and do the same thing. So they keep doing that until they get all the pieces of the puzzle. Then typically the next thing that you'll see is like a dollar authorization from like maybe PayPal or Amazon, something where that person or that fraudster is attempting to use that card number to confirm that it's really a valid card number, and then you'll see the fraudulent transactions start coming through. So when you're paying attention and you're looking at your vendor site for the information that you cannot see on your core, that's going to be a trigger that something's going wrong. And then you can take the steps that Jim and I will outline shortly, talking about mitigation. Kind of a high-level overview there.
Let's take you back a little bit to these fraudsters. So these people?
They can be people. They can be automated robots, auto dialers, smart people writing programs somewhere.
And generally, these are not the 14-year-old that's in a garage trying to figure things out. These are criminals that are members of criminal rings that are very intelligent and very good at what they do. If they're going to figure out how to get a hold of your bin and see if there's what the sequential order of your cards are coming through at, or whatever else it might be, Julie, they're going to figure it out.
Right. So it sounds to me, though, as though we're really saying that, brute force bin attacks are, although unfortunate, very, very unfortunate, frequent, and we should always be monitoring. And that's really what the premise of today is about.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they know, and one of the reasons why Heather and you and I had decided to do this one more time, and this is not just a reiteration of what we did back in June, but they understand nobody's available on Friday, Christmas Day. They understand nobody is available on the first day of the year of New Year's. They pick these times during the holiday because there's a lot of activity going on. And what I mean by that is less likely to be detected because of all the activity that credit unions need to keep their eyes on. So that's one of the reasons why when Heather and I talked about this back in September, we said we need to get back in with our credit unions right around the holidays, and probably from here on out around the holidays, because when Heather and I came back from President's Day, as she will attest to, the attack started on Friday. We basically worked the weekend with the credit union, and then all the way in until Tuesday to get a plug in the dike, for lack of a better way of saying it. So that's the other reason why we said, now's a great time to bring this up to a crowd of people. And I'm seeing everybody on here, and one of the individuals on here, Denise from Monroe, probably educated Heather and I more than anyone on what fraud management really looks like from a perspective when you're using advanced fraud tools offered by your switches. Denise, you and I need to catch up with her again as well to see what's new, probably before the next one.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more, Jim and Heather, about this term switch that you're using. For those who might be new to the processes, what does that mean?
Sure.
No, Heather, I'm going to let you take that.
There's a lot of lingo associated with the ATM debit card world. So it's really hard to understand what each person calls specific things, and that's why I say switch or vendor. When we start talking about switch or vendors, we're talking about the FISs, the Fiservs, the WorldPays, the Metavantes, the Shazams. We're talking about the vendors of the world. So who you have your contract with other than CU Answers, that bypass person. Because there's different levels associated with transactions, which we'll get into shortly, which make that all play together.
Mm-hmm. So step number one for anybody who might not know is know your vendor.
And Heather, why don't you explain the difference between a switch and a network? Because there is a definite difference between that we learned as well.
Absolutely. So you have your vendor, and then switch, as I call them, they're interchangeable to me. Those are the same meaning. And then you get down to the network level. And the networks are going to be the little bugs that you guys have on the back of your cards. The nicest, the genies, I think, for WorldPay, if that's still even there anymore. Star has their own network, so that can get confusing. If you think you're with Star as a vendor, you could also have them as a network as well. So you start talking about those networks. Now, each credit union, when you get your own BIN, you get to associate what networks you want to route transactions through. So you get to pick that. Well, the merchants get to pick that too. So the Targets of the world, the Walmarts of the world, when they set up their POS system to swipe cards and take payments from credit unions, they get to pick who the transactions can route through as well. If they happen to have the same one you're linked with, they'll usually route through there, but sometimes they have their own and they just force them through that network as well, and then the transactions can still route.
And what we found out is some of the networks are there purposely for the purposes of international transactions, correct, Heather? Not all networks are supportive of those international transactions coming through.
That is correct. Yep.
So take me into that a little bit more.
Maybe we should start with how bad was President's Day, Heather? And I shouldn't laugh about it because it wasn't a good weekend. It was 3 credit unions were involved, and one to a 6-digit number, the others probably to mid 5-digit numbers as it relates to the losses. But Heather, why don't you elaborate a little bit on the big one and what we learned about networks in foreign countries specifically?
Right. Sure. So the one of the main ones that we worked with that particular weekend, all of their transactions originated out of Brazil. So no network that associated with the credit union, not something that they signed up for. It was just somehow, somewhere in the grand scheme of the transaction process, these transactions were coming through as foreign transactions. And there's flags that you will be able to see soon that will tell you if these are foreign, but you can see them today in your vendor and in your switch. There's a lot of different things that come to play, and I don't know if this is the right time or not, but I think it's a good time for us to kind of get into how a transaction processes. So the way a transaction processes, me as a customer, a consumer, I'm going to swipe my card, and I'm just going to pick on Walmart for a moment. I'm going to swipe my card at Walmart. Walmart gets to decide what network to run that transaction through. And then the network then processes the transaction through Visa, MasterCard potentially, and or depending on the amount of the transaction directly to your vendor or switch. When the vendor or switch gets the transaction, they then push it back to the core, and then the transaction routes back that same manner. So there's all these different levels in the transaction, as I kind of just alluded to, and any one of those spots is a spot that could be compromised. Going back to Target, their POS machines were compromised. So it was compromised from the very beginning of the transaction, not necessarily further upstream.
And that was really important to understand in this regard, because what threw Heather and I into a tizzy, and we just couldn't seem to get the answers that we needed, was that they were all forced post transactions. They weren't asking for an authorization. So as Heather alluded to this, and the networks, I know one of your points, Heather, that you made last time is, are there stand-in arrangements between all of these networks that we don't even know? There may be, there may not be, but what we found out is those are questions that need to be asked of credit unions to say, FIS can stand up and say, we're it. It's stand in with us only. Well, no, not really. What if the merchant can't get to you? What if it's a foreign country coming through another switch or another network and they can't attach to you? I don't think, Heather, we really got a definitive answer on that. I think we made an assumption that could definitely exist. And as part of your due diligence with your switch vendor, I'll get this right, Heather, yet today, that, those are questions that we need to ask. And there's, credit unions, and then what we found out is this credit union didn't have any foreign countries blocked, which was surprising, but it was a credit union that their members, they were travelers. I mean, on a frequent basis. It wasn't that, they had members that traveled to Brazil. And unfortunately, the switch that they were using, if they blocked a country, they blocked it for everybody. And they didn't have the ability to issue what's called a travel letter. Is that correct, Heather?
Yeah.
It was all or none. And even, again, I'm hoping what you hear from us and take away today from us, and this is something that Julie is eventually going to say at least 5 times. What are the takeaways? Well, from Heather and I's perspective, and we're going to go much deeper into this, is understanding what your switch is doing for you. Asking the questions and doing the due diligence outside of vendor due diligence. And I'm a big proponent, obviously, of vendor due diligence. We got 70 plus credit unions doing it with us, but these aren't the questions that we're recommending. But these are the questions that you should be understanding.
So Jim and Heather, on your white paper here, you're referring to these limitations, right, of foreign countries specifically. And what I'm hearing is the importance of being proactive. So if these aren't steps that a credit union has already taken, this is something that they should do right away.
100%.
Absolutely. And I get that question of, well, what foreign countries should we block?
Right.
Well, obviously there's an OFAC issue. So those aren't coming through your switch period. They're not allowed to let those transactions come through. So all the sanctioned countries. But then there's another list out there, and we added it to the advisory from FinCEN. There's an advisory board, an international advisory board that they don't regulate, but they serve as the dictatorial umbrella over all countries as it relates to financial crimes, and it's called the Financial Actions Task Force. They publish a list, and it changes. I can't say it changes annually, but it changes with some frequency. Foreign countries you just don't want to do business with. One of the big ones is the Bahamas. I mean, there's so many shell companies in the Bahamas. They're just saying, yeah, you probably don't. At least start there. I know when we did this back early in the summer, one of the other countries that came up was Spain. River Valley, Renee at River Valley had brought it up to say, man, that's just not a good place. Because now, and we all know South Africa, Nigeria, Ukraine, because it's not blocked, Crimea, you know, there's enough of these that you should say, at least get those out of there. And as Heather and I found out, you might want to ask you switch with foreign countries you don't want to play nice with. If anybody is going to know, they are.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's almost like a checklist I'm building in my mind, right? Of the, when I'm working with my vendors, the checklist begins with what countries and what can I do as a credit union to mitigate this risk, right? And what are they going to do to help me? You mentioned these strategies and schemas that already exist in the query, Heather, that you had mentioned earlier. That sounds kind of complicated. Can you take me through a day-to-day with it? Should I do this every day? Should I be doing this prior to a holiday? What does that really look like for me?
You know, I think that's going to vary on the credit union, the size of your portfolio, the activity that's done. Definitely over the holidays, being more due diligence, but you know, then what's going to happen? The fraudsters are going to be like, oh, great, now these people are paying attention, so now I'm going to start doing it on non-holiday time frames. So in essence, you don't really want to let your guard down. I personally don't think, and again, I don't know anything about the vendor side or the switch side, so I don't know what that looks like. But I'm envisioning it to not be too difficult to go in and to pull that information on their side and see the information. So if you have somebody popping in there, just kind of scanning real quick, maybe once a day, maybe twice a day, again, depending on your size and your portfolio, I don't envision it taking too long or too much time out of the person's day just to have that due diligence in there. Going back to this particular paragraph, there's the strategy of looking at the information yourself, but then there's also schemas that are already set up at the switch or vendor. So when you're working with your vendor and you're setting up things with them and you're going through things, they're going to start talking to you about building their fraud parameters. What do those look like? Make sure you know what those are. Make sure that you understand how quickly you can put something new in. If you find something today, is it going to take you a month to get that change pushed through your switch or your vendor in order for whatever it is that you find to stop? So just being due diligent on what they have in place to protect your credit union and how quickly we can make adjustments or changes to it as well. And in the chat, Denise kind of alluded to that as well, saying that it took several days for her to make some changes and get something put into place for her.
And all the while, these transactions were forced posting, and they could not stop it. She just had to sit and watch this happen to her credit union. It was like, okay, there's one loss, there's another, there's another, there's another. And that's why when Heather says, what we found out, the switch that Heather and I were working with the credit union, is the fraud management people work 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Well, they got to be there because they're the ones that are implementing the schemas. The schemas could only get put up to the production system at 10:30, 1:30, and 4 o'clock. So, you know, another takeaway, like Heather said, something's going on. You need these people to move quickly. Understand what quickly means in your world. So you're not going back to the CEO going, I don't know if I told you this. Nobody's working today. Go home, enjoy your Christmas. Oh, and by the way, we're probably losing about $50,000 every 6 hours. I'm exaggerating, but like Julie said to begin with, get the knowledge in your head now. And now's not a bad time. Isn't there a blackout period, Heather, right now going on with the switches? Does that blackout include schemas? Do you know?
I don't know if it does schemas. I know it's usually implementation changes. I'm not 100% sure on fraud changes.
And the other thing is, there are some individuals that Heather and I have gotten to know over the years that always kind of knock us back three feet to go, why didn't we know that? The Notre Dames of the world, the Monroes of the world, these people, they've just shared so much information with us as it relates to, what type of schemas are they running? Why did they go to this specific switch? Because of the fraud management platforms. Use the network as well, because there is some talent in this network as it relates to fraud management, that if you feel like you're going it on your own, reach out to Heather and I. We can definitely make some introductions to some very, very savvy people as it relates to fraud management.
And as much as we would like to be able to control everything, almost 100% of this whole process is outside of our core. We don't know. We can't help you. We can show you some stuff after the fact, but that's too little too late. So there's a lot of things that we're talking about today that has been shared knowledge with us that we want to pass on to you to help you guys mitigate your own losses.
Right. The power of the network is pretty amazing. Before we get deeper into that, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of a checklist. Now, I'm building this in my head, but boy, it's going to be awesome for us to just maybe put something out there. Maybe a credit union has one of, when we talk about risk and we're talking about managing that risk and mitigating it, I think it's important to talk about all the other things that are in your white paper. But before we get there, I really want to talk a little bit more about what's at risk besides dollars, because there's so much more.
Well, one of the things I think we found out with one credit union on a phishing attack, Heather, definitely reputation risk.
Yep.
Would you agree?
Oh, 100%.
Your members don't understand the technology behind all this. And I don't know if you're aware, but frequently either I, Patrick, or Heather will get drug into a situation. You've been hacked, CU Answers. We take that very seriously, extremely seriously. Most of the time I get that, it's home banking, and no, they gave up their credentials, and here's how we prove it. But the same thing would happen with your membership. The mother, the son, and the cousin went through a brute force bin attack, and they're looking at the credit union going, something's going wrong with you. My data is not safe anymore. And that's the other thing. The response plans that we don't even get into here, didn't even bring it up at the last one. This should be part of your DRBR plan. You're going to get a brute force bin attack. What's our response plan? Who gets called first, second, and third? Who's in line? Do we need our board chairman? Now, the phishing attack, or the brute force bin attack, the big one, the board chairman was sitting right next to the CEO all weekend. There was no, I got to bring this up on Monday morning kind of thing going on. They were there. And I would strongly encourage you to say, okay, DRBR, what did you say about us getting, our debit card PAN compromised by very sophisticated bad actors? Now, how do we respond? let's do a tabletop exercise. How do we respond? Because the reputational risk to the credit union, yeah, it can be even greater than the financial risk when it comes right down to it. You don't want to be headlines in the newspaper, your local newspaper, that you got hacked.
Yeah. So what I think would be a good addition to my checklist here in my head is know your vendor would be top priority, right? Know your vendor, educate your staff so our staff knows how to inform ourselves of an occurrence happening before it happens and while it occurs, right? And educate the member. Yeah, I think that's really important as we educate our members of how things happen and how they can help us by being informative, right, at the right times.
Yeah. So do you have an email? Do you have an email set aside just waiting in case something like this happens? Because that's what this credit union did. They put the phishing attack, they put an educational piece out, and they just blew it out to every member that they had a valid email address on about how to avoid phishing attacks. You know, when it comes right down to it, how to avoid phishing attacks or giving up credentials on home banking, this is the prime season for you to be blowing those types of knowledge base items out to your members to save them and to save you. The credit union did an excellent job. The only issue is it was late. The members had already been compromised.
That's a really good point of just remembering to be diligent about sending member communications often, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that, but especially before these peak times when we know that things like this occur. So unfortunate. So then moving on to this checklist idea, here you've talked about annual reviews and alert processing. Tell me about this annual review idea. It's a tongue twister, just so you know.
Heather, I'll let you take care of that one.
Yeah, I'll definitely take that. But I do also want to address a comment in the chat as well. Somebody had asked if it's safer to use a debit card versus credit card. In my opinion, no, they're the same. It's not going to make a difference whatsoever. When you get the fraudsters, they're looking for a BIN. They don't care if it's a debit or credit card. The difference is you probably have different limits, different daily limits, etc. And your chargeback rates are probably different. And I'm sure Jim can kind of touch a little bit more on that. Maybe I'm assuming. I don't know. I've heard before that if you use a credit card, the member is more protected than an actual debit card. But I have not dug into any of that to agree or disagree with any of those things. So you guys probably know that a little bit better than me. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, the process is going to be the same regardless of debit or credit cards. And when it comes to annual reviews, one of the things that Jim and I had said previously, and I'll say again, we say annual, maybe it should be semi-annual, maybe it should be every couple months. It's going to be up to you guys to understand what you have out there. Now, Jim mentioned before that with these credit unions, both him and I were working all weekend with the credit unions. That's the best thing about our partnership. You guys are our partners, and we want to make sure that you know that. And we will give you whatever time we have to make sure that we can address these types of situations. So while they might not have been able to get any help from the switches, we were trying to do things that we could do on our side. I believe that we actually did do some limit adjustments on the cards themselves. I think we were running some floods over the weekend to change the limits, the available limits for members and all those types of things. But overall, where are your limits for online and offline transactions? Where are they in the ballpark of where you think they should be? Do you need to look at, I don't want to say hiring them, lowering them? If something comes up, and that could be part of your DRVR as well, but understanding where your limits are and making sure that you're not setting your limits too high and allowing yourself room for potential loss there. Looking at any new fraud-related tools that your switch might have implemented or ones that you may even have to purchase. we don't know what the switches have out there, and we don't know what they offer when it comes to fraud-related tools, but what is there? Making sure that you're looking at them, talking about them. Are there things that will benefit you and your membership to help avoid losses? Are there alerts that your switch can set up that will talk to you about some sort of awareness? Do you literally have to look at that query every day on your switch, or can you set up something at the switch to say, if I have 60 denials within a 4-hour time span, I want you to tell me? Are there something like that that you can put in place at the switch? And then talking to your vendors in their fraud department about any sort of lockdown that they might know. Is there something that they recommend to help mitigate your own risk? So understanding those key things and understanding the way your course is as well. We have tune-up programs that we can go through with you to kind of talk through some of the things that we do and what we verify. But again, as you remember the transaction routing, we're the last piece of that puzzle. So most of this occurs before it even gets on our table or on our radar.
And the other thing that we found out, Heather, too, was whoever you generally speak with at the switch, that's one department. What Heather and I found out is, let me get the fraud department involved. So when you do these annual reviews, you just don't want your general rep there. You want both departments at these reviews to say, I want fraud. Now, some of our credit unions have actually, like with Fiserv, they've actually purchased a fraud manager liaison at the switch. They've gone to that level. I don't know if all switches have that, but Denise at Monroe, before she was there, she was at a community bank, and she actually had an individual. She could just pick up the phone and say, hey, I got an issue. What's going on here? And it was immediate. So again, you need to have those people at the table when you're doing these annual reviews to say, what are you seeing? What should we be doing? Do I need to spend money? I mean, literally, do I need to spend money this year? Because I think some of these schemas cost money. I'm pretty sure they do, according to what I was told at Notre Dame. But again, it's important. I can't reiterate that these reviews need to happen. Like Heather said, maybe it's more frequently than annual.
Right. Yeah, especially as we think about the timing of events as they occur.
And I'm going to back up a second, Julie. The piece in this white paper specific to stand-in processing here, that section right there will allude back to the conversation Jim and I were having earlier about understanding stand-in at different levels. So a lot of times when you think of stand-in, you think of, okay, well, Vantif and CU Answers are not talking to each other anymore, so now I'm in stand-in. Well, it might actually be NICE is not talking to Vantif, so now NICE has put you into stand-in. Is that a thing? Understanding those and seeing how far and how far down the road or the transactional path that can stand-in occur, and who sets those particular limits and what are they? And making sure you understand transactions in that manner as well.
So Heather, do you think when you query the data, you would get a better feel for that on just a slew of forced post entries that came through that weren't like obvious Home Depot, Lowe's, those types of things? Would that be a telltale sign in the data that there could be downstream stand-ins under the, not just us in the switch?
Yeah, it could very well be. The problem is I don't know the process, and I don't know if it's somebody that's just bypassing the system or tricking the system and forcing the transaction through without using a stand-in limit. I don't know. But somehow in this scenario, those transactions were getting pushed through with no authorization. I don't know how they got approved. So understanding that with your vendor, have them tell you how those things work. You know, I'm not connected enough with those switches to be able to dig down at the network level to be able to start to understand that myself. That's where the due diligence is going to unfortunately fall on the credit unions.
Yeah, I think between you and I think we still have on our goal list for next year is what are the due diligence questions you ask of a vendor prior to inking the contract. For those that are on today, Heather and I are going to be working on that next year. Selfishly for me, for vendor management, but from Heather's perspective, from a consulting end, to say, you're switching vendors. Okay, you need to ask these 15 questions as it relates to fraud management. You know, that I had no idea that the travel letter worked one way at one vendor and another at another. Well, did the credit union ask that question? Did they understand it up front? They may not have.
Well,
Right.
and I think in the world of consolidating EFT vendors, you know, there might only be a couple different options.
You're very correct.
Yeah. So you know I hold you to the fire for homework exercises. So folks that are listening to us today, you can expect that it will happen. So.
Sorry, Heather.
Thanks, Jim. So just a little teaser for Jim and Heather. But you know, one of the things I was thinking of is if I'm a credit union is listening to this presentation again, right, as part of my review processes, and understanding and takeaways from it are the questions that I can be asking, right? So I think just listening to this presentation again would be a great exercise for folks. And so our friends joining us today, please share with your friends and let them know that this information is available. I think that's so important. And somebody was asking about where might you find the presentation. We will have the recording and the white paper available on the Audit Link Suite website. So auditlinksuite.com, and then CU Answers on-demand videos as well. This information is available to you. So make sure you head out there and watch for our announcements. Client News, we do send announcements out periodically to let you know where to find the information, so watch for that.
So Julie, we have a number of questions we might want to break for some chats.
Yeah, let's go to this question from Debbie here. If cardholders are signed up for card control alerts, will they be notified of declined transactions? So let's start with that.
I'm going to take this twofold here, Debbie. If you're talking about the CU Answers tool, then I'm going to say the answer would be no. If you're using our tool, this all happens before I even know about any of it. They're going to see the declines of card not present, and that never makes it to the core to where I would be able to send them a notification. If they happen to get a transaction through and they did send through an authorization and I declined it, absolutely, then we would send that out. But I think a majority of the items that we're talking about in this case is even before it makes it to us.
Right. And Debbie also had mentioned about multiple members calling at the same time would be an alert, right? Look to see what's happening, to see if the bin has been attacked. If that's the case and they can affirm that, is the next step calling CU Answers?
I would definitely contact my team, and we can pull Jim in as well. Probably starting, it's a case-by-case scenario, right? Because in this case, the brute VIN force attack is all before us, and everything is going to have to be done at the vendor. The vendor's going to have to make changes. The vendor's going to have to do specific things. There are things that we can do, so we would definitely be a resource, but probably more of a secondary resource. There are certain times, though, that, you know, something's going on, and it might not be something so invasive, right? Where you can call us and we can start digging and help guide you through the process. Absolutely. When I convert credit unions over, I tell them, call me first. Don't call your vendor. Let me dig. And then if I need your vendor, I'll have you engage them with me. Because I can talk the lingo and I can talk the talk. but a lot of times they don't want to talk to me because I'm not their contract holder. They don't care about me. They care about you, and they want to talk to you. So that's where we might have to have the third party conference call in place. But we're willing to kick it off, start those conversations, and set up that next call.
That's reassuring. Connie's wondering if we put our cards on lock every time we're done using them, would that stop fraud attacks?
It might lessen it a little bit. If there's an authorization piece or component to that item, then and your card was warm, I would assume the transaction wouldn't get through. But in this case, it could very well have still gotten through if they come through as a forced post transaction. Because remember, a forced post transaction says you don't have a choice, you have to take this. You have to post it. Somewhere along the line, something occurred and it says, do this.
Thank you. If there's any other questions that I may have missed or you have new, please do make sure you use the chat and let us know. That would be really great. I know Jim and Heather are on the line with us and we have a captive audience, so that would be a great time to get those questions out there. What else, Jim and Heather, might we consider from the white paper today, and what's coming next? What can we expect in the future?
I think for me, I'll kind of take a stab at this first and then let Jim kind of go from there. It is being proactive. Julie, as you mentioned earlier, make sure you're proactive. Make sure you're communicating with your vendors, with the settlement team. If you're not sure what to ask your vendor, call me, call Jim. I'll happily help you create some key points to talk to your vendor. I'll even get on a conference call with them if you would like. I don't have any problems with that. We're here to help you mitigate your losses. So making sure you're doing those annual reviews, making sure you're doing your due diligence, making sure you have somebody doing some verifications. We're always available, so if something happens on the weekend, there's somebody in this organization that will be able to find me, whether you email me and I respond, because my email's on my phone. There's usually a way to get to me. But one of the things not necessarily ATM debit card related that I would like to bring up would be bill pay P2P, because it's still kind of along those same lines, and you may not be the bill pay P2P experts for your credit unions, but if you could share a message with them to make sure that they're doing their due diligence on their P2Ps as well. Running, I know my settlement team, I believe they just did one last month maybe, but they try to do quarterly training sessions on how to evaluate P2P transactions and how to look at them to ensure that you don't have some sort of a fraudulent P2P transactions occurring on your credit unions as well. And I don't want to get too much into that because it's not something that is on today's radar, but it's just something that as we go into the holidays would be something that I would be paying attention to if I was a credit union, monitoring my EFT related items and monitoring my bill pay P2Ps.
Yeah, all payment channels have levels of risk, and P2P and the debit card rails share the exact same risks. It's the social engineering, the hacking, the malware, the vectors are all the same as it relates to them getting money out of those members' accounts. It's just a different rail that the money leaves on. And as Heather alludes to on P2P, 'tis the season. Tis the season since COVID broke out. CFPB the other day did a web conference. I know I was talking to Carrie at River Valley that it was really directed at the elderly and just regular folks. They're doing another one this week on COVID related, but we're in a time where it's not just the holidays, it's the holidays with people that have been shut in for a very long period of time. that are more apt to be vulnerable to social engineering, to giving up their credentials. I can go on, and for the most part, for the people that are on the call today, I think I'm speaking a bit to the choir, but we do have tools on the system too. I mean, we have an account status dashboard that you can go into to say, are there a ton of lost and stolens? And what Heather and I discovered on one of the phishing attempts is, yeah, there have been a lot of lost and stolens. Well, what does that mean? That means that a bad person could have your BIN. They've got a valid card. Now, you may have closed it down, but they still got the mag strip. They've still got the PIN. They can still do the brute force BIN attack. So, those are gut checks that I don't want you to forget about. The other one that's come up, and it's real, is Cash App and the amount of fraud that's flowing through those P2P networks. And it's picking up quickly. Do you know how much is going through your credit union and Cash App? Do you know that you can get to that information in less than 3 seconds? Could use where your member shop. Type in cash, type in Venmo. You just need to start paying attention to this. Oh man, that just doesn't look right. We had a credit union that just converted, that after I heard about Cash App, that I went in, and they were a very new credit union. They're probably on this web conference today. I went, well, I wonder how much they had go through. And like in 6 weeks, it was $503,000. I was going, whoa. So do you even understand that metric? With that fraud vector now just shining a light right on you, how are you going to manage that as well? So I know Heather and I both said, can we take this opportunity to talk something other than debit cards? But Venmo, Cash App, Green Dot, they all ride the debit rail. So that's very, close to our hearts here today. Julie, we have 7 minutes left. I think we might want to just open it back up for questions. Heather, do you have anything more?
No, I'm ready for questions.
So chat those questions, folks. And in the meantime, Jim, you know what I'm going to ask, and Heather, likewise, you probably do too. Break it down for us. What are our key takeaways today?
I'll let you go first, Heather.
You got it. The key takeaway: know your vendor, know your schema, know your limits, monitor. If you need any help, any questions, call the settlement team at extension 309. There are things that we can show you to look at after the fact. We don't have much insight to what you see as far as on your vendor side, but we're happy to share as much information, as much knowledge as we possibly can.
And I can't add enough. Denise from Monroe said one thing to Heather and I that resonated. Your switch provider has to be your partner. If you don't feel like they're your partner, they're probably not going to have your back when one of these events happen. I can't add much more to what Heather just said, other than, I agree. Pay attention, monitor, understand the manner in which your members are using that access device throughout the network. It's absolutely vital. And finally, use Heather's team when something happens. Both Heather and I, the weekend didn't matter to us at that point. We just needed to help because the money was disappearing at a rate that was totally unacceptable to everybody. And you're our owners. So, but, use us not use us, but make sure you always reach out to us.
Right. And we mean it. We're very sincere about that fact that we're here for you. We're here to serve you. And in your members. So please do reach out. Make sure you jot down the contact information if you don't already have that stored in your favorites at your credit union, and make sure the information is accessible to your teams as well, right? We want to make sure that you have what you need 100% of the time. My extension here is 131 also, and please feel free to connect at any time. I'm happy to help, happy to assist you in getting to the right people at the right times. Any other questions that you have, please reach out direct. We're happy to assist. And thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again very soon in the future. Thanks so much.